Welcome, everyone. My name is Damian. I'm the Dots editor team lead at Unity. And today we're going to be talking about Dots authoring and debugging workflows in the Unity editor. Now, we're going to go into some dangerous waters today with some live demos and in-progress features. So things are subject to change. Keep that in mind. OK, I don't want to leave anyone behind, so I'm just going to do a very quick refresher on Dots, so we're all on the same page. So Dots is Unity's data-oriented tech stack. This is the stack. At the bottom, we have the foundation layer, which includes the burst compiler, which optimizes code for the target platform. Then we have the C# job system. And then on top of this, we have the experimental entities package, which implements Unity's ECS. And on top of that, we have the various ECS-based features, including ECS physics, rendering, netcode, etc. Now, this stack makes it easier to take advantage of multi-threading, batch processing, and implement things like determinism in your games, qualities that have been historically more difficult with the object-oriented approach and GameObjects. Now, let's go over really quickly what ECS is, Entity Component System. It's a pattern. In the context of Unity, we have the object-oriented approach on the left here with GameObjects and modal behaviors. Here I have a box rotation modal behavior, which has some data, speed, and an update callback, which performs the rotation in this case. And what's important to note here is that the data and the functionality are all together into this object. When the update is called, you're on the main thread, and you can essentially do whatever you want. You can access any object in the world. You can manipulate any data. On the right, we have the data-oriented approach with entities, ECS. And the big difference here is that we've separated the data from the functionality. So the speed is now in its own component, the struct, box rotation data. And the functionality has been taken away from the entities and the objects and moved into this system. The system still gets an update call from the engine on the main thread, but then it just iterates over all the entities that it makes sense to iterate over for this feature. It finds the entities using queries. So here's a query. And we're just looking for all of the entities that have the rotation component and the box rotation data component. We don't really care what other components they have on them. Through the query, we can also be very specific about what type of access we want from on our components. So for the rotation component, we of course want read-write access because we're going to write a new rotation. But for the box rotation data component, we only need read-only access. We're just reading the speed. And this will come in handy, as you'll see later in the demos. And then we just for each over all these entities and perform the desired operations. Now, if you're familiar with Dots, these are some new APIs that we're working on for a future version. I'm just giving you a glimpse. But again, safe harbor, this is subject to change. But the core idea, the pattern here is not changing. This is ECS. This is how it works. Now, in Unity, of course, there's a whole bunch of code and tooling on top of modal behaviors in GameObjects. We can't just flip a switch, even if we wanted to, and just move everything over to entities and components. So what we've been doing for a while now is we keep the authoring side as GameObjects and modal behaviors. They're nice and friendly for authoring. There's a lot of familiarity with them when you work with them in the editor. And so they are staying as GameObjects. But on the runtime side, we now let you use entities and components and get some of the benefits that come with Dots. So here I have the same box rotation component. And what I've done is I removed the update call because I don't need it anymore. It's not running in the runtime anymore. All I need the modal behavior for is for its nice custom inspector and all the other tooling I have in the editor. On the right, we have that same component, box rotation data, which has the speed. And here we're defining through this Baker API how exactly that conversion will be performed from modal behavior to entity component. So we take in the model behavior here, and then we create the correct component, and we assign the speed from one to the other. And again, this is in-progress APIs. This is a new version of conversion. If you've used that before, we're kind of starting to call it baking. And one last slide about dots. Chunks and archetypes. This is important because I'm going to go over some tooling that exposes archetypes in the editor. So it's good to have this image kind of fresh in your minds. This is essentially how component data is stored in memory by Unity's ECS. We have these chunks, which are just equally sized chunks of memory. And within a chunk, you only have the components for entities that belong to a single archetype. They're all of the same archetype. Archetypes are just unique combinations of components. So we can see archetype 1 here is just a blue component, and we have 8 entities, but they don't take up a lot of space. We can just shove them all into 2 chunks. Archetype 2 is 2 components, 2 different components, and this is how they're laid out in memory. And then archetype 3 has a 3rd component, which takes up more space, and you need more chunks to store those 2 entities. Okay, there was a Dots roadmap talk on Monday, which went over these releases in more detail, but if you missed that, essentially, last week we released a new version of entities, 0.50, and accompanying packages. And with this release, we are resuming regular releases of experimental Dots packages. We took a little bit of a break, but we're back. These are still not recommended for production use, and they will be working on the 2020 and 2021 text streams, so the LTSs. And then we have 1.0. 1.0 is coming up for the 2022 text stream, so think around LTS kind of time frame. And this marks the actual release of the entities package with support for use in production. But it will still be aimed at experienced developers that know Dots and Unity to some extent. So let's start with 0.50. What is already released? So we have a spinning cube example here, as one does with demos. And the first cube here is just a plain old game object. I have a rotating cube game object, and I have my box rotation modal behavior that you've seen on the slides earlier. Has a speed, and it rotates the cube. Nothing big here. Then we have a subscene. Subscenes are just Unity scenes that are kind of embedded in a root scene. They're used for fast streaming of scenes, or subscenes in this case, when you use entities and dots. But all you have to really know for today is that any game object you put in a subscene will be converted to entities on the runtime side. So I have the same rotating cube here. It's literally a clone of the other one. But in what you're actually seeing spinning here is an entity with a component on it being rotated by a system. It is not the game object that's actually rotating. So if we just expand to the bottom section here, what I kind of want to do with this editor layout is I want to claim the top here as the authoring side of your game and the bottom as the runtime side. I want to really drive that separation and make it obvious. So of course we have the scene view on top for the authoring and the game view at the bottom for the runtime. If we look at the hierarchies for the authoring side, we have of course just a regular hierarchy showing game objects, and then for the runtime we have the dots hierarchy showing entities, because this is what your runtime now is. And if we select the entity has its own inspector, its own custom inspector. You can see all of the components here and all the values being changed by the system. So if we just lock this, go back up here, select the game object. Now our picture is more complete. So again, the top is authoring, scene view, game object inspector, game object hierarchy, game object inspector. And at the bottom, we have the game view, entity hierarchy, entity inspector. With this setup, what I can also do is I can show you that conversion in action. So if I increase the speed on the game object in the subscene, I'm changing the game object here, not the entity, but conversion is actually running all the time incrementally. And so it detects that I changed the speed on the game object, and it patches the corresponding entity and component. So if we scroll down here, we can see our box rotation speed component has been updated to the 17.1. Okay, so with that kind of spinning away, let's go over some more features that are coming in 0.50. That came already, actually. We have the archetypes window. This is why I showed that slide. This is giving you all your archetypes at this moment in time. They're sorted by size. And then if you can get some details on each one, how many entities have this archetype, how many chunks are being used, and the actual components that make up this archetype. Next up, we have the components window. This is just a list of all of your component types across all of your loaded assemblies. That's what it is. And then we have the systems window, which gives you a list of all of the systems that are running in the game in the order in which they're updated, as well as all the number of entities they're currently matching, like one of their queries is actually matching, as well as some timing information on how long it takes for their update to be called. Now, you've seen me select the entity here, and it has its own inspector. But what I can also do is I can select the system and see its details with its inspector. And I can also select components and see their details with their own inspector. So let's bring up our own box rotation component here. Same here, box system, okay. And what you might have noticed across these three different types of inspectors is that they all have this relationships tab. So what we're trying to do with the relationships tab is we're trying to make it very easy for you to navigate the relationships of your systems, components, and entities. So for a component, the relationships are all of the entities that have that component right now, and of course all of the systems that have a query that is looking for this component. And that's what we see here. Now, what's neat about the Relationships tab is that I can continue my navigation and exploration from here. So I can select the entity here and go to its relationships. And here we see all the systems that are potentially messing around with this entity. I can go to one of these systems, see what query they're running, go to, let's say, a component here. I want to see rotation here. What fields does it have? Okay, it has a value field. And go to its relationships. And then I can also use the system, go to its relationships, and here I get all the entities that this system is potentially doing something with. Also, every time I see a query here, I can open a dedicated query window, which will give me the components that are being looked for, as well as a full list of all entities that are matching this query right now. This is not that interesting right now. There's only one entity, but it will get more interesting later in this talk. So that's what we call interoperability. It lets you explore relationships. Sounds a bit weird, but it's for components and entities. Okay, moving on. Next up, we have the profiler. So in the profiler, we added two new profiler modules specific to entities. We have the entities memory profiler, which give you essentially the same thing that the archetypes window gave you, but over time. So let's say you have a huge memory spike at some point, it's gone now, you can go back in time and see what was the most egregious archetype in that spike. But otherwise, it shows you the same information. And then we have the structural changes profiler, which I need to restart the game for. And we get a nice spike at the beginning here. And this shows you all the structural changes that were done to your entities. So we have add component, remove component, create entity, and delete entity. If we dive in, we can see the world this happened in, and we can also see which system performed the structural change. Of course, timing and counts as well. This is important to track because structural changes can be expensive. Every time you add a component to an entity, again, going back to that slide with the archetypes and chunks, all the components for the entity have to be copied to a new chunk. So it can get expensive, but now you can track it with this profiler. So continue playing. The last feature I want to show for 050 is something we call entities journaling. Think of this as kind of a dash cam for your game. It's always running, it's optimized so that it can just be running in the background all the time. And it's just capturing all the data changes that happened to your components. So it's actually copying the data. Every time you set it to some new value, it copies the value to a circular buffer, and then you can go back in time and see what that value was when something bad happened, for example. So in 050, you can access this data two ways. You can access it by just exporting to CSV, and then do whatever you want with it, or through the APIs. So if we just attach here. Okay, so in the watch window, I can go to this entities journaling records API, and then I also have, I can just do .all and then just get all the records currently in the journal. But I can also, there's some filtering helpers to kind of narrow things down. So here I'm filtering by this rotating cube entity, which is this little cube. And what I get essentially is a full history of this entity, starting with create entity. There's some setup happening here. Conversion is also doing things to this. That's also being tracked. And if I scroll down enough, I get to kind of the steady state of this entity, which is, of course, the rotation. That's a whole bunch of set component datas. If we expand one of these, we get some details. We get to see the component types involved. We get to see the data at this moment in time. So that's that copy that I was talking about. Of course, the entities that were involved, and one of the most important fields, which is the executing system, which tells you, who to blame, basically, who did the action. And that's journaling. Just gonna stop that. And that's 0.5, 0.50. And that's all released last week, so you do have access to that today. Now let's look at the future. What's coming next? 1.0. Okay, we have a slightly more complicated game here. But what I try to keep the same as the previous demo is that editor layout. So again, the top is for authoring, the authoring view with the scene view. And then at the bottom, we have the runtime side of your game, which is the game view. But now if we look at the hierarchy, we see we only have one hierarchy for both authoring and runtime. And we have only one inspector for both authoring and runtime. And really, this is what we're trying to do with 1.0 is come back to the familiarity of working with GameObjects, where the GameObject is the thing you author, and then when you press play, that same GameObject becomes alive and starts doing stuff in the game, and you start seeing values changing and so forth. But of course, it's a little trickier now because the runtime is a completely different representation. It's entities now. They have a completely different inspector. They work differently a little bit. So what we're doing in 1.0 is we're introducing these data modes for the hierarchy and the inspector. So for the hierarchy, it's currently in this authoring data mode. And this is the dots hierarchy, but what I'm looking at here is the authoring side, which means I'm seeing game objects, both outside the subscene and in the subscene. Same with the inspector. The inspector is in authoring data mode, and so I'm looking at the game object inspector. Now, what I can do is I can toggle that, and now I flipped the view in the hierarchy to look at what my runtime representation of the game is. There's some additional markings. You can think of this as warnings that, hey, you're looking at runtime now. This is volatile stuff. So obviously the circle went orange, and then we also get this orange highlight for every single item here, because everything I'm looking at here is part of the runtime. I get access to the runtime, of course, because conversion is running all the time, even in edit mode. So it's converting GameObjects to entities all the time. And so GameObjects that were outside the subscene, of course, are just themselves. They're just now their runtime selves. But all the GameObjects inside the subscene are now entities. And right away, you can start to see why we want to still keep the GameObjects for authoring, because the whole point of entities is to make it easier for the CPU to chew on your runtime. So we're trying to please the CPU, not the human, whereas GameObjects are more friendly to humans. For example, a static hierarchy of transforms is usually flattened when you convert it to entities, because there's no reason to have a hierarchy in the runtime for something that's always there. So you get a whole bunch more noise here with the entities. But you still have this view available. Same for the inspector. If I switch that, I get to see the entity inspector for my player. The player is a GameObject in a subscene, so it gets converted to an entity. And now, if I switch the inspector to runtime, I see the entity version of the player. And again, everything is marked orange to be very clear that this is runtime stuff. Okay, let's switch back and start playing. Okay, it's a little aggressive. Sorry about that. Get away. Okay. Okay, so we're in play mode now. I can play. Hopefully you can see that. And what happened in the hierarchy in the inspector is they've switched to this third mode, which is called mixed. So mixed mode is trying to achieve the best of both worlds in terms of an authoring experience. So by default, it's going to always favor the authoring representation of whatever you have. So in this case, for the player, the authoring representation is the game object, and that's what you see in mixed mode. But for something like an entity down here that was created just at runtime, it has no game object counterpart, it will just show up as itself, and it will have that orange marker to make it obvious that this is only part of the runtime. And the same happens for game objects outside the subscene, because of course they're not converted, they are just themselves, and so they get that orange marking as well. And same for the inspector. I'm still looking at the game object inspector, because that's the human-friendly version of this player for authoring purposes. But now I can actually see values changing. So these values are not changing on the game object, they're changing on the entity, right? The game object doesn't do anything in runtime, but we're just feeding those values back in the game object inspector. And wherever we do that, we make sure we mark it very obviously with this orange override. So these values are clearly coming from the runtime, from the entity. Okay, now let's see what we can do with all of this. And of course, I still have access to my pure modes. I can still look at my pure runtime, and I can also look at my pure authoring in play mode. Same for the inspector. I can look at my pure, look at that, don't look at that. My pure runtime, so the entity, and I can also look at my pure authoring, which is the pristine values that were there before you entered play mode. We're just looking at the game object. So let's see what we can do. This is just an obstacle course, basically, with an office theme. I have to get through each room, and this maze is too much work for me, so I'm just gonna make it easier for myself. One thing I forgot to mention is that the scene view also has this duality. This is actually nothing new in 1.0 or even 0.50. You could always do this. It's controlled via conversion over here. So you can have the scene view show you the entities, and so you get to see stuff happening in the scene view, or you can have it show you the authoring state, which means you're looking at the game objects, which are not being operated on in the runtime. And so I don't see my player moving around in the scene view because the game object is not doing anything. Okay, well, with that in mind, let's just make this easier. Like super easy. Okay, that's a much better maze. Direct path. And I just realized I made some changes in play mode. I removed that orange tint, which was there for a reason. It was to warn me that I shouldn't be doing this, and I did it. And so yeah, I need to probably redo it. Or not. So because the scene view was showing me game objects, when I clicked on them, I was selecting game objects. And the game objects are on the authoring side. They're not being touched by the runtime. So because they're not touched by the runtime, we can now be very certain that any changes that are done to those game objects are done by the user as part of an authoring operation. And so we can now enable changes of scene stuff in play mode without resetting it when you exit play mode. So my subscene here is dirty because I moved some walls around. It's still dirty when I exited play mode because I didn't actually save yet, but we can do that, Control S, and now it's saved. And my changes are in version control now, on disk. And if I start playing again, all my changes are still there. All is good. Okay, let's see what more we can do here. This is a game. That table is kind of going a little crazy, so let's see what that's about. One thing I like about looking at the authoring side in the scene view is that it's nice and peaceful. I don't have to click on that table while it's moving. I can just click on it here. And looking at the game objects, on the game object, we have two mono behaviors, obstacle move and test desk. Okay. Let's go and see what the runtime looks like. You can search here. Okay, so it looks like the conversion is 1-to-1. We have obstacle move to obstacle move and test desk to test desk. These are entity components. So what we can do now is go to the relationships tab and we get a list of all the systems that might be doing this rotation thing. I know these are all built-in systems. So I can focus on the ones that start with room. This is room 2. So probably I can focus on these two, although that's a little foreshadowing there. And what we can do is we can look at their queries and gain some insight. So looking at the obstacle move system, this one is writing potentially to obstacle move as well as translation. And translation is just translation, does not include rotation. So this is not the system that we want. This is an innocent system. Apart from the name, if that name was not so obvious, we can look at the query and we can see that we're potentially writing to physics velocity, which does include rotation, as well as matching on this test desk component. And real quick while I'm here, I'm going to go to the query window, and I'm going to see what other entities are potentially broken. And I can see here there's an orange desk somewhere, not in this room, that is spinning out of control. I'll deal with that later. For now, I'm just going to fix this one. So, of course, I want to fix it permanently, not just in the runtime. So I'm just going to go to mix mode, and I'm just going to remove this component. So this mono behavior. So that fixed the rotation, and that's because what happened is I removed the authoring side mono behavior. If we look back on the runtime side and we look for room, we now only have the obstacle move component. Incremental conversion again kicked in. It went to the entity, removed the corresponding component, and in the process, if we look at relationships, we're no longer affected by that remove before GDC system because its query is not matching this entity anymore. So that's cool. And of course, this is scene room 2. I made a change on the authoring side. That's fine. Let's save and continue playing the game. I just fixed the bug without exiting play mode. And I can really quickly just reset the rotation too through the same kind of approach. So I'm just setting the authoring side rotation, and this will immediately reset the rotation on the runtime side through conversion, and now it's all fixed. Cool beans. Let's continue. Madness, complete madness. But what's worse is that my frame rate, yeah, it's like, just took a nosedive. There's the nosedive, or cliff rather. So that's not cool. Let's see what we can find from the profiler. The memory has stayed pretty much the same, but on the structural changes side, we now have a whole bunch. So let's see what that's about. We have a whole bunch of remove components, 1,000 of them, and a whole bunch of adds. Let's see what that's about. Yeah, that's the foreshadowing there. So this system is removing a lot of components, and it's also the one that's adding them. Most likely the same component, just keeps doing it. Okay, let's see what more we can find out about the system. So I'm just gonna search for it in the systems window, select it, and look at its queries. So we have a query that's looking for all entities that have the translation component, which is basically all of them that were converted from a GameObject, as well as not having the room 3 test. You can also exclude components from a query. And then the second query is just looking for the opposite. So it's just adding and removing the same component. Okay, great. Now, this is something I need to fix in code. I'm not gonna do that now, but I do wanna continue playing without domain reload and all of that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to disable this system. And now my frame rate is back up. And this is just a debugging feature of the systems window. You can just disable a system. It's really nice for debugging on the spot. You can just turn on and off a whole feature and see if that's what's causing the problem. So now we can move on with a high frame rate, if I can. Okay. Whoa, there's a lag there. Yep, that's a big lag. There's a whole bunch of structural changes that happened, and my memory just went insane. So our world is now 500 megs. We have an archetype that is 500 megs. And that's because it has 2 million entities in it, 33,000 chunks, and 3 components. Okay. Now we can go to the structural changes profiler module and see if we can find out who did this, but for that, I'm just gonna go to the journaling window. So in 1.0, we're gonna have a third way to access that journaling information, which is a new editor window. In here, you have the same access to all of the records that have been recorded so far, as well as a pretty powerful search. And also here, the top one is the last action. So it goes from newest to oldest by default. So what we can do is just scroll a little bit. Yeah, okay. Yep. And it's all the same system. We can, of course, see who did this. It's all the same, yeah. By the way, there are better ways to create entities. Do not call create entity one at a time like this. It's just done for dramatic effect. So we can select one of these, see some details, just like we could in the watch window with some nicer UI. We see the entity created, we see the components that were added, and of course we see the executing system. What's cool about the window is that because it's in the editor and it's in context, I can of course just select this system in the inspector. I can see all of its queries right now, but more importantly, I can see its relationships at this moment in time. And from this, I gathered that this is actually a useful system that's doing things. This is matching all of the NPCs, which are these yellow dudes here chasing me. It's matching the player, which is me. Probably how they know where to go. And the scenario component is just the one that's enabling the room to wake up. So we don't want to remove the system. This is doing the right thing. It's also, if I go to queries, we can see it's not looking for this control proxy component. It's operating on other components. And really, if I go and select this component and look at its relationships, I can see there's 2 million entities that have this component, but there are 0 systems that do anything with this. So they're just sitting around. Okay. Now, what we can also see with this is that the editor tooling has been optimized to some extent to deal with this quantity of entities. So, of course, the journal can handle millions of records, but also the hierarchy can handle millions of entities. That's the whole point. And of course, I can select them, and I can see their components, and I can also see that they are very lonely. Cool. So that's fine. They are not actually doing any harm right now. My frame rate is a little bit lower, but I can still play. I'll fix that later in code. Let's move on. I'm just going to clear the journal right now, start recording, and continue here. Select my player. All right. Come on. Come on. All right, that's not cool. Okay, I'm just gonna try to cheat temporarily to get past them by giving myself a higher run speed. Should be enough. Come on, come on. Okay, what I do want to point out here is that I was intentional in that I wanted to change my run speed temporarily in this play session on the runtime side only. I did not want to dirty my scene. I don't want to actually commit this as my permanent run speed. And that's fine. I can do that because I can see that it's orange. It means that this run speed is my runtime value. And so even if I change it, I'm actually changing the value on the entity side. But this is not working, so I want to actually just restore it to the authoring version of this. So let's go to authoring mode. And now I get to see what the original value was, what's actually saved on disk in my scene, 10. But now that I'm here, I kind of always want it to run a little bit faster, if I'm honest. So I do now want to change my permanently my speed. So let's do that. Okay, so 2 things happened. My subscene is now dirty. I'm still in play mode. My subscene is now dirty. I changed the authoring side. And also, the player is an instance of a prefab, and I just added a prefab override. So both of these things work just fine in play mode for the subscene. And I'm happy with that. I'm just going to Control S, save, reselect, and now I have a permanent speed boost. Okay, we still need to fix this problem, though. So I'm just going to select the original NPC asset, prefab asset, and I'm gonna tell them to, social distancing. That's a thing now. Come on, move. Yeah, that's a good distance. Still a little creepy, but better. Are you? Okay. I thought I was trapped. So this is nothing new. Prefabs have been around for a long time. I changed the original asset and it propagated to my instances. It did a little bit more than that. It propagated to all my entities as well, because it's really the entities that are running in play mode. But conversion takes care of that. But what I really want to show here is that you could have always authored in play mode in Unity. It's not that strange. Any asset you change during play mode is of course saved. It's not lost when you exit play mode. It's really just objects in the scene that were reset. So now we have a consistent UX around what exactly is runtime and what is authoring. If we look at this asset, we see no orange, which means it's authoring. So that's that. Let's go to the final room here, which is creepy also. That's multiplying way too fast and not cool. Let's see what the issue is there. Here's another advantage to looking at the authoring view of your scene. This plant is essentially cloning itself, so I would need to find the original, those movies, you have to find the case one, in this mess here. But I don't have to really do that because I'm looking at the authoring side. And the authoring side just has the one original plant. I can select it. And right away, I can see that there are some problems here. My spawn period and my magnitude have been touched by the runtime. They are not supposed to be touched by the runtime. The seed is still good. It was not touched by anyone. It's still showing me the pristine authoring value. So, 1 out of 3. It's all right. But we need to do something about the spawn period. So let's see who could have done this. First off, I just want to see what the mapping is. Okay, so in this case, we have one mono behavior that was converted to 2 entity components. The mapping doesn't have to be one-to-one. It's usually, sometimes it's not. So we have the room 5 spawner, which has most of those fields, but we also have a spawner helper component on the runtime side. But my spawn period is on the spawner, so that's good. This is what I want to track. So now we can look at the relationships. We can see all the system that might have done this. These are all built in. We already know what this one does. So let's expand the room 5 ones. Okay, so this system is looking for spawner helper and spawner, but right away we can see that this system is only interested in reading from room 5 spawner. It specified a read-only property here, and so this is essentially a guarantee that this system was not responsible for setting that value. So that's cool. We can eliminate one system. We're still left with 3. All these 3 ones could have potentially written to it. So let's see who done it. Going to the journal, we can just, the most direct way here is really to just search for a value. If I can type. Okay. Okay, search is not complete yet, but I think we have everything we need. If we go to the oldest record, we can already see a potential problem here. This is kind of the first time a value of 0.06 was found in a component, in a field of component. So if we go here, we see our executing system is this spawner secondary stage. So that's cool. It's this one here. And we can see the components it modified as well as the entity. And if we click on it, we can see here the value at the time, basically the value after the set was called, which is 0.06. That's the problem. Okay, so now we have a culprit, but we still have 2 other systems that also have write access, and I kind of want to know what they're doing. So for that, I'm going to change my filter here. I'm going to filter by this entity only. I'm not interested in any other entity. I'm also only interested in this component, so if any other component is being written to, I don't care. And I'm also interested in this system, but not the whole name. I'm just gonna remove I'm just gonna leave the common root of the name, and actually I wanna make the component an equals so that it's exactly this. And now we can remove the value. And we can see that all 3 systems are guilty equally. The init one sets it to 0.08, okay, and then this one, first stage sets it to 0.05, also wrong, and then we have 0.06. Okay, so they all are bad. Good to know. Now, I want to see what the original value was, because I want to continue playing, and I don't, oh, pause, still bad. I don't want to fix that right now, so let's just fix that in the runtime side only, just to get us going. So the original value, we can go back to the authoring side, and we can see the original value was 0.3. This is what I was expecting. So let's go back to the entity inspector this time. Components, search for room, or you can also search for spawn period. Yep. And just change this on the runtime on the entity directly. And now if we go, it's more reasonable. Still pretty creepy. Okay. So, if you have one thing to remember from this talk, there's that slide, is that with 1.0, we are trying to make it very obvious what is runtime and what is authoring. Because we believe there's value in being able to author in play mode. Ideally, you never exit play mode. You just keep playing your game and you build your level as you play your game. And you can save and undo and do all the things you can do in edit mode, but while the game is running, why not? Of course, for that, it needs to be very clear that you're changing the authoring side, or that you're changing the runtime side. So this is what we're going for with this new pattern, which will be introduced with on the dots side. This is not a general pattern for Unity itself. It's gonna just be tied to entities, and we'll see where we go from there. I also want to be clear that this is just a small sliver of what's coming in entities 1.0. I really focused on the authoring experience here. There's a lot of other features coming on the API side in 1.0. Just keep that in mind. And thank you. I think we have time for questions. If there's any. There's 2 mics.
Hey, really cool talk. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, so one of the things I've experienced with entity component systems, and you briefly touched on it, is its use in multi-threading. Is that something you guys are experimenting with? And I'm interested to hear if you have any strategies with simultaneous writing or locking or anything like that.
Right, yes. So one of the reasons for that separation of data and functionality is that it makes it a lot easier to multi-thread. The chunks also make it easier to create jobs that go over a nice amount of components at a time. So basically, it's a lot easier to go from something like, so something like this, where you essentially are going over data. So you can move this essentially to a job, and now it's it's kind of already prepared for you to be multi-threaded.
Cool, thank you.
So I have a question. What's the end game of dots? It's supposed in the future we will all be doing dots, or perhaps it's just perhaps it's something when you need it, or just supplying another way of implementing things in Unity as an overall.
Yeah. So I can only really talk up to 1.0. This is where we are pretty sure what we want to do for 1.0. And really that is this kind of hybrid approach where you opt in. So you have a GameObject game, and then what you can do is you can create a subscene, shove some GameObjects there, write some conversion, and convert just those GameObjects to entities and take advantage of the benefits there. So for 1.0, this is really where, think of dots as a feature. Where we go from there is not yet, I'm definitely not at liberty to comment on. It's still being thought out.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Hey.
A lot of these changes are very centric towards the editor. I was wondering if there's any debugging features that have come for Project Tiny builds.
So Project Tiny is on hold at the moment. That's all the information I have on Project Tiny. So really for 1.0, 1.0 does not have any content around Project Tiny. It's really focused on dots in the editor, in the big editor with GameObjects.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Is the authoring process in editor similar when with the introduction of netcode into a kind of similar example to what you were showing?
With dots, ECS netcode?
Yeah, exactly.
It's very similar. I mean, it's basically the same. You just have multiple worlds. You have the server world and the client worlds.
Are those just different subscenes? Like
No, beauty of live demos is that I can actually show you. So the hierarchy has a world selector, so you can look at different worlds. So here you would have, if this was a netcode game, you would have server and then all your clients here.
Okay.
And same for the systems window and various other views, you would be able to switch between them. But the game objects are otherworldly. They don't belong to a world, so the authoring side is always going to be the same.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Hi.
Hey.
I want to say I'm a big fan of the changes in what this whole system is doing. But I'm a little bit confused as to what the significance of the subscenes are and why you want to use subscenes opposed to just empty game object parents in terms of your hierarchy. And I think earlier you mentioned that objects not in a subscene are not turned into entities. Is that correct?
Yeah, generally. You have the option to convert a single game object to entity outside a subscene. This might go away. Not sure yet. But you can imagine if you do this, you would have the similar experience with these like picked objects. The subscene has some benefits for streaming because with the subscene you can close a subscene. Mm-hmm. And what this does is it unloads all the game objects, and now you just have the entities that were converted kind of loaded. So you still see the geometry and it still actually works. But you see no game objects at all. And if you have a huge scene, this really came about with Megacity, if you know that demo. Well, if you have a huge scene, it's a lot faster to load it even in the editor if you don't have to load all the game objects as well. So this is the main use case for subscenes.
Okay, that helps. Well, thanks.
Good day. So how do relationships between the game objects and the subscene objects that are converted to entities work? Like, can they reference each other? How does the sequencing of the, resolving the entity code versus the pure game object code work, if that makes sense?
You mean, so on the entity, we can actually see that. We have this entity GUID component, which is essentially your instance, your GUID for the game object. It's attached, it was converted from.
Yeah.
And you can actually go to it in the header of the entity. So this is 0.50 where we don't have the data modes yet.
Yeah.
So if I just double click on this, then it goes to the game object.
Okay.
And there's ways to also have the reverse mapping.
Gotcha. So you can still have like full references between things and get information between one game object and another.
Sorry. Yeah. So that's a different feature. This is when you want both the game object and the entity to live in the runtime together. That's a use case as well. I didn't cover that in this demo, but that's a different feature. It's where you're like syncing the two.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That's still a thing. Okay.
Hi, thanks for the demonstration. Could you show us that last slide again that had some of the new and 1.0 stuff? Because some of that stuff I haven't seen yet on like the roadmap, like enable bits, which I've heard talk about on the forums, but haven't seen on like the roadmap information.
Okay, I should double check the roadmap. It's definitely public information. I think it's been answered on the forum at some point. But yeah, it's coming to 1.0. You can enable, disable components. It'll be fast to do that. Obviously, that's implemented because structural changes are expensive, so it's way faster to just enable, disable a component instead of removing it completely for context. I think we are good. Thank you.